My name is Evelyn Hart, and I am 34 years old. The moment that changed everything didn't come with screaming alarms or tragic words. It came quietly. The doctor's hands were shaking. I noticed it immediately, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. A slight tremor. The kind that happens when someone is trying very hard to stay composed and failing. She wasn't looking at the ultrasound screen, where my baby's heartbeat pulsed steadily in soft black and white. She wasn't smiling, wasn't narrating measurements, wasn't pointing out tiny limbs the way doctors usually do when everything is fine. She was staring at my file. At the name printed neatly at the top. My husband's name. Then she reached forward and turned off the monitor. Just like that, mid-exam, mid-heartbeat. The room went silent so fast my ears rang. "Mrs. Hart," she said, her voice low, barely controlled. "I need to speak with you privately. Right now." My stomach dropped straight through the table. I thought something was wrong with the baby. My chest tightened. My hands went cold. Every fear I'd managed to keep buried during pregnancy exploded at once. Defects, loss. The kind of news that follows you forever. She didn't explain. Just helped me sit up, handed me a paper gown, and guided me down the hallway. She opened her office door, ushered me inside, and then, without hesitation, locked it behind us. Locked it. That's when I knew this wasn't about my pregnancy. She sat across from me, folded her hands like she was bracing herself, and said the words that cracked my life clean in half. "You need to leave your husband today," she said. "Before you go home, you need to contact a divorce lawyer first." I laughed, not a nervous chuckle. A full, disbelieving laugh. "What?" I said. "That doesn't make sense. We're married. We're having a baby. We're happy." Her face didn't soften. "That's exactly why you're in danger." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Her fingers trembled as she placed it between us. "What I'm about to show you," she said carefully, "will destroy everything you think you know about your marriage. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, you need to understand who I was before that moment. Before I learned my entire life had been engineered by a man who slept beside me every night. I grew up surrounded by wealth, but never defined by it. 5 years ago, my grandmother passed away and left me a trust worth just over $2 million, along with our historic family home in Connecticut. 5 generations of women had lived there, loved there, survived there. I never flaunted it. I built my own career as a marketing director. I drove an old car. I lived quietly. The inheritance was security, not identity. But it made me visible. And visibility attracts predators. I met Lucas Reed 4 years earlier at my family's annual charity gala. I was trying to escape a man who asked about my financial portfolio within minutes of meeting me when Lucas appeared. Charming, relaxed, effortlessly normal. He joked about the music, asked about my favorite books. Didn't mention money once. I mistook that for integrity. My mother didn't. After meeting him, she pulled me aside and said quietly, "His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Something about him isn't right." I dismissed her. Defended him. Chose him. That choice cost me 2 years of near silence with the woman who raised me. Lucas and I married a year later at my grandmother's estate. He cried during his vows. Real tears. Shaking shoulders, trembling voice. I thought it was love. Now I know it was relief. Because the long game had worked. After 2 years of trying to conceive, we were told natural pregnancy was nearly impossible due to his infertility. We turned to IVF. Lucas insisted on researching clinics, handled the paperwork, chose the doctors. I thought he was being supportive. When I finally got pregnant, he suggested I update my will, said it was practical, sweet, responsible. I thought it was love. And then, 4 months later, I was sitting in a locked medical office with a doctor whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. She slid the folder toward me. "I need you to understand something," she said softly. "Your husband didn't just betray you." She met my eyes. "He planned this." And as I opened the folder and began to read, the life I thought I had, my marriage, my pregnancy, my future, started turning to ash in my hands. If there is one decision I would relive differently, it's not marrying my husband. It's choosing him over my mother. I didn't realize that at the time, of course. No one ever thinks they're choosing wrong while they're doing it. We tell ourselves we're being brave, independent, grown. We convince ourselves that love means loyalty, even when that loyalty demands silence from the people who know us best. My mother had known me my entire life. She knew my patterns, my blind spots, my tendency to see the best in people long after warning signs started flashing red. And she knew something was wrong with Lucas Reed the moment she met him. It was a quiet observation. No accusations, no dramatics. Just a feeling. He's too practiced, she said one evening after dinner, swirling the last of her wine in the glass. Everything he says sounds rehearsed. I rolled my eyes. He's just polished, I said, confident. Not everyone is hiding something. Mom. She looked at me the way mothers do when they see a storm forming on the horizon and know they can't stop it. Confidence doesn't require pretending, she replied. And charm isn't the same thing as honesty. I ignored her. Lucas, on the other hand, noticed her skepticism immediately. That should have scared me. Instead, I mistook it for discomfort. Hers, not his. He never argued with her outright, never challenged her opinions. He smiled politely, asked respectful questions, complimented her cooking. On the surface, he did everything right. But behind closed doors, the seeds were planted. She doesn't trust me, he said one night, casually, while we were brushing our teeth. I don't know why. I've always respected her. She's just protective, I replied. Of you, or of your money, he asked lightly, like it was a joke. I laughed. That was my mistake. Little comments followed, subtle ones, easy to dismiss. She doesn't think I'm good enough for you. She treats me like I'm after something. She's never really liked anyone you dated. Each sentence nudged me a little further away from her, and a little closer to him. When we got engaged, my mother hesitated before congratulating us. Not because she didn't love me, but because she was afraid. I mistook that fear for judgment. The first real fight happened a month later. She asked if we discussed a prenup. I snapped. Accused her of being controlling, of not trusting my judgment, of reducing my relationship to contracts and clauses. She tried to explain. Told me wealthy families don't survive generations without safeguards. Told me love and preparation weren't opposites. Lucas stayed silent during that conversation. Later that night, he wrapped his arms around me and said, I don't want to come between you and your mother. But it hurts knowing she thinks I'm some kind of opportunist. I reassured him. Promised him. Chose him. The wedding planning widened the gap. My mother questioned vendors, asked about finances, wanted transparency. Lucas called it interference. She doesn't see us as a family, he said. She sees you as an asset she's still managing. By the time we said our vows, my relationship with my mother had already fractured. After the wedding, it shattered completely. She tried one last time, pulled me aside during a family dinner and said quietly, if I'm wrong about him, I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing. But if I'm right, I need you to know I tried. I told her she was being paranoid. I told her she was jealous of my happiness. I told her she needed to let go. We stopped talking after that. 2 years passed with nothing but polite birthday texts. No lunches. No phone calls. No holidays together. Lucas never told me to cut her off. He didn't have to. He just made sure I felt supported every time I chose him instead. When we struggled to conceive, my mother suggested a second opinion. Lucas insisted we handle it privately. When IVF became our only option, she asked about the clinic. Lucas reassured me he'd research everything thoroughly. When I got pregnant, she cried with joy through the phone, but there was relief mixed with something else. Concern. She asked questions. Lucas rolled his eyes. See, he said later, she can't even let this be happy, and I defended him, again, every time. What I didn't understand then, but see with horrifying clarity now, was that isolating me wasn't a side effect of his behavior. It was the strategy. Because my mother would have asked the right questions. She would have noticed the inconsistencies. She would have smelled the lie before it ever reached my doorstep. And when I finally sat in that locked doctor's office, holding a folder filled with proof of my husband's betrayal, the first person I thought of wasn't him. It was her. The woman I pushed away. The woman who saw the truth in 5 minutes when it took me 4 years. And I realized something devastating. Lucas didn't just want my money. He needed my mother out of the way to get it. When I first saw the two pink lines, I cried so hard I had to sit down on the bathroom floor. Not because I was fragile. Not because I was overwhelmed. But because for 2 years I had been carrying quiet grief in my body, month after month of disappointment, hope rising and collapsing in the same breath. Lucas found me there, back against the tub, test shaking in my hand. He dropped to his knees in front of me like a man receiving a miracle. "We did it," he whispered, pulling me into his arms. "We're finally going to be parents." I believed him. I believed the tears in his eyes meant the same thing they meant in mine. The fertility diagnosis had nearly broken us. Severe male factor infertility. Numbers so low the specialist had used words like statistically negligible and medically improbable. Lucas took it hard. At least, that's what I thought. He cried in the car afterward. Apologized over and over, like the diagnosis was some personal moral failure. I held him. Told him we'd face it together. What I didn't know was that those tears weren't grief. They were calculation. IVF was our only option, and even then, our odds weren't great. A specialized procedure, one chance after another. Lucas insisted on choosing the clinic himself. He said he wanted to feel useful, wanted to contribute. I let him. The first cycle failed. I didn't leave the bed for 3 days. Lucas held me, whispered encouragement, told me we'd try again. He brought me tea. He stroked my hair. He played the role perfectly. The second cycle worked. The moment I told him I was pregnant, he lifted me off the ground and spun me around the kitchen. He talked about nurseries and names, and the future like it was something he'd always been meant for. And then, almost casually, he said, "You should probably update your will." I laughed. "What? It's practical," he said. "We're a family now. You need to protect the baby." I thought it was sweet. I didn't hear the greed hidden under the concern. Pregnancy should have been peaceful. Instead, something shifted around the 4-month mark. It was subtle at first, the kind of change you talk yourself out of noticing. Lucas started keeping his phone face down, changed his password, took calls outside. When I asked, he brushed it off as work stress. Late nights followed. Too many of them. He was a financial advisor, not an ER doctor. There was no reason for him to be putting out fires at 11 at night on weekends. I found receipts. Restaurants I'd never been to. Hotels too close to home to make sense. Charges that didn't align with any explanation he offered. When I questioned him, his answers came fast, too fast. Client dinner, networking event. Conference ran late, and when I pushed harder, his tone changed. "Evelyn, you're being paranoid?" he said. "It's the hormones. Pregnancy does that to women." I apologized. That's how good he was. The money conversations escalated next. We should add his name to my trust. Just in case. Power of attorney would be smart. Selling my grandmother's house made sense financially. Each suggestion came wrapped in concern. Each refusal earned me distance. He slept on the edge of the bed. Claimed my body had changed. Said he didn't want to hurt the baby. It sounded caring. It felt like rejection. One night I woke up at 2 in the morning and found him in the kitchen, whispering into his phone. "It's almost time," he said. "By spring everything will be settled." When he saw me, he hung up instantly. "Work emergency," he said. "Go back to sleep." I did, because believing the lie was easier than facing the truth. My best friend Tara came over for lunch the following week and watched me make excuse after excuse. Finally, she put down her fork. "When's the last time he was happy to see you?" she asked. Without an audience, I couldn't answer. The ultrasound appointment came a few days later. A routine visit. Nothing special. Lucas didn't come. Said he couldn't miss a meeting. That's how I ended up alone in a doctor's office, staring at a monitor that went dark without warning. That's how I learned the pregnancy I thought would save my marriage was actually the centerpiece of my husband's trap. And as the doctor slid a folder across the desk and told me she had proof, I finally understood something chilling. This baby had never been part of a dream. It was part of a plan. The folder was heavier than it looked. Not in weight, paper never is, but in consequence. The kind of heaviness that settles in your chest before you've even opened it, when your body already knows your life is about to change. The doctor didn't rush me. She gave me water, sat across from me, let the silence stretch until my hands stopped shaking enough to turn the cover back. Inside were documents I didn't recognize, printed emails, medical records, and photographs arranged with clinical precision. "This is why I locked the door," she said quietly. "And why I turned off the monitor." I looked up at her. "What does my husband have to do with this?" I asked, still clinging to the last scraps of denial. She slid one page forward. It was a consent form. My name was printed at the top. My signature was at the bottom. Except, it wasn't my handwriting. It was close enough to fool someone who didn't know me well, close enough to pass through systems that never question a husband's authority. But I knew my signature. "That form," she said, "authorizes genetic material substitution." The words didn't land all at once. I read them again and again. Substitution. "That means," she continued carefully, "the embryo implanted during your IVF cycle was not created using your husband's genetic material." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. She flipped to the next page. Sperm donor profiles. Multiple. Highlighted, ranked. All selected by Lucas Reed. The dates matched the IVF timeline perfectly. He had known, from the beginning, about his infertility, about the impossibility of conception. And instead of telling me the truth, he had orchestrated a workaround that cut me out of the decision entirely. "But why?" I whispered. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. I kept reading. Legal emails between Lucas and a private attorney. Estate planning discussions. Hypothetical scenarios outlined with chilling calm. In the event of maternal death, upon successful birth of heir, trust transfer contingent upon legal parentage. My vision blurred. He hadn't just wanted a child, he wanted leverage. The photographs came next. Lucas meeting with someone outside a fertility clinic I had never visited. Lucas handing over an envelope. Lucas smiling, wide, relaxed, confident. The doctor leaned forward. "Your husband has a documented history," she said, "of targeting wealthy women with family trusts. You are the third." The room tilted. "Third," I repeated. The first woman had divorced him before pregnancy. The second had miscarried under suspicious circumstances and signed over a settlement to avoid public scandal. I was the one who made it far enough. The one whose inheritance was old enough, clean enough, structured enough to be worth the effort. The final section of the folder contained one last cruelty, a drafted death certificate. Unsigned, undated, but filled out, my name. "'Cause of death, complications during childbirth." My hands went numb. "That document," the doctor said softly, "is why you cannot go home." She explained that the clinic had flagged irregularities during routine compliance review. That Lucas had been too involved, too controlling, that he'd requested access no husband should legally have. When the doctors dug deeper, they found everything. By the time she finished speaking, my marriage had collapsed into a pile of evidence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the proof of a life I never agreed to live. "I loved him," I said finally. She nodded. "They always choose women who do." I asked the question that terrified me most. "Is my baby safe?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "The pregnancy is healthy, the donor was medically screened." Relief hit me so hard I nearly cried. Then something else took its place. Anger, cold, focused, absolute. Lucas had underestimated one thing. Me. He thought fear would keep me quiet, that shock would paralyze me, that I would crumble. Instead, something sharp and unbreakable settled into my spine. "What do I do?" I asked. The doctor met my eyes. "You disappear," she said, "and you let us help you document everything." I left through a back entrance. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a woman carrying a secret, a child, and a truth powerful enough to end a man who thought he was untouchable. As I got into my car, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Lucas had planned my ruin. Now it was my turn to plan his. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like silence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't drive aimlessly or pull over to hyperventilate. I drove with terrifying clarity, hands steady on the wheel, eyes locked on the road, every sense sharpened as if my body had decided survival was now my full-time job. Fear had burned itself out. What replaced it was calculation. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the one place Lucas would never think to look for me. A small, nondescript hotel near the outskirts of the city, the kind business travelers use for one night and forget by morning. I paid in cash, gave a fake reason for the stay, asked for a room away from elevators. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself think. Lucas believed I was predictable, emotional, dependent. He believed pregnancy made me weak. That shock would make me compliant. He was wrong. I turned my phone off and removed the SIM card. Then I powered it back on and watched the notification counter climb. Missed calls, texts, voicemails stacking up like unanswered accusations. "Where are you? The clinic called. What's going on? You're scaring me." I almost laughed. By nightfall, I had a burner phone and a new email address. I memorized numbers instead of saving them. I paid attention to exits, reflections, patterns. Paranoia, maybe, or instinct. The doctor connected me with a legal team the next morning. 2 women who specialized in financial crimes and domestic coercion. They didn't look surprised when I told them everything. They listened, took notes, asked questions Lucas would never anticipate. They confirmed what I already knew. What my husband had done wasn't just immoral, it was criminal fraud, identity falsification, reproductive coercion, conspiracy, potential attempted homicide. But proving intent would take time. And time was something I couldn't afford to waste. "Fear will keep you alive," one of the attorneys told me. "But strategy will keep you free." So we built one. First rule: Lucas must believe he was still in control. I turned my phone back on. I sent a single message: I needed air. The appointment overwhelmed me. "I'm fine. I'll come home tomorrow." The reply came instantly: "You scared me. I love you. Please don't do that again." There it was. The mask snapped back into place. I returned home the following evening acting smaller than I felt. Quieter, apologetic. Lucas watched me like a hawk, relief and suspicion warring behind his eyes. I played my part perfectly. I let him think the doctor had found nothing concerning. I blamed pregnancy hormones. I cried on his shoulder and thanked him for taking care of everything. Inside, I was cataloging his habits. What time he left, who he called, which drawers he locked. At night, while he slept, I photographed documents on his laptop, copied emails, tracked financial transfers that didn't align with his income. I learned names, accounts, dates. Every lie has a rhythm. Once you hear it, you can dance around it. Lucas grew confident again. Too confident, he started pushing harder, asking about the trust, suggesting changes, reminding me how fragile pregnancy could be. "You should really rest more," he said one night. "Stress isn't good for the baby." It sounded like concern. It felt like a warning. That's when I contacted my mother, not with an explanation, with an apology. "I was wrong," I said when she answered, "and I need your help." She didn't ask questions. Didn't say "I told you so." She told me to pack nothing I couldn't carry and to trust her. Within days, my assets were moved into legal protections Lucas couldn't touch. My will was rewritten, medical directives reassigned, quietly, legally, irrevocably. The final piece was evidence. I hired a private investigator recommended by the legal team. A man who specialized in uncovering patterns men, like Lucas, thought they'd buried. What he found was worse than I imagined. Gambling debts, affairs, prior lawsuits sealed through settlements, women who had almost become me. Lucas wasn't just dangerous. He was desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. I waited. I smiled. I let him believe the finish line was close. Because revenge doesn't begin with confrontation. It begins with patience. And by the time Lucas realized I wasn't afraid anymore, every door he thought was open had already closed. Traps don't snap shut the moment they're built. They wait, they sit quietly invisible until the target walks forward under the comforting illusion of control. Lucas had always believed himself to be the architect, the man arranging lives like chess pieces, confident the board belonged to him. I let him keep believing that. Outwardly, I became easier, less resistant. I stopped questioning his late nights and stopped flinching when he brought up money. I let him think pregnancy had softened me, rounded off the sharp edges of my independence. Inside, I was sharpening every one of them. The private investigator, Mark, worked methodically. No theatrics, no dramatic reveals. Just facts, timelines, receipts. He traced Lucas's financial bleed like a surgeon mapping veins. The gambling debts were larger than Lucas had admitted. offshore accounts, high-risk online platforms, loans taken under shell LLCs that all traced back to him. Men who smile too much always have something to hide behind the grin. Then came the affairs. Not love affairs. Transactions. Women approached through networking events, fitness studios, fertility forums. Always women with assets. Always women he mirrored, charmed, positioned himself beside like a solution to a problem they hadn't realized they had. He wasn't looking for companionship. He was hunting stability. The pattern was undeniable. Marriage talk, subtle financial integration, isolation from family, reproductive pressure, legal maneuvering. I wasn't special, I was just profitable. Mark uncovered emails Lucas believed were long deleted, threads with lawyers, debt collectors, and one particular broker who specialized in accelerated asset consolidation, translated men who needed fast money and didn't ask ethical questions. The more we uncovered, the calmer I became. Knowledge does that. It replaces terror with certainty. Meanwhile, Lucas grew impatient. How much longer until the trust changes go through? He asked one evening, trying to sound casual. Soon, I replied, resting his hand on my stomach. I want everything settled before the baby arrives. His smile was hungry. We staged delays intentionally, small complications that made sense on paper. Doctor recommended rest, legal reviews, timing issues, each excuse bought us more rope. He didn't notice it tightening. My mother worked quietly behind the scenes. She contacted old family attorneys who owed her favors and new ones who recognized danger when they saw it. The house was transferred into a protected trust Lucas couldn't touch. The remaining assets were shielded through layered legal entities. Lucas signed documents without reading them. He trusted me. The irony almost made me sick. The trap required one final element. Public exposure. Men like Lucas don't fear consequences until witnesses appear. We needed him confident enough to step into the spotlight willingly. The opportunity came in the form of a charity garden party at my grandmother's estate. A legacy event Lucas loved attending because it made him look successful, respected, untouchable. I think this year should be special, I told him. A celebration before the baby comes. He agreed instantly. Invited clients, colleagues, donors, people who mattered. Mark coordinated with law enforcement and regulatory agencies quietly, sharing evidence piece by piece, ensuring warrants and investigations were already in motion. No surprises, no escapes. The night before the party, Lucas poured champagne and toasted to new beginnings. I smiled and clinked glasses. He never saw my hand shaking. Not from fear, from anticipation. Because revenge isn't rage, it's precision. And everything was finally in place. The next day, the estate bloomed with white tents, string lights, and laughter. Lucas played the host flawlessly, shaking hands, telling stories, basking in admiration. I watched him from across the garden, surrounded by people who believed his lie. And I felt something close to peace. Because for the first time since the doctor turned off the screen, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading. The trap didn't need force. It needed timing. And as the guests gathered, unaware that this celebration was about to become a reckoning, I adjusted the microphone in my hands and took a steady breath. Lucas looked up, smiled, and stepped exactly where I needed him. The garden looked like something out of a magazine. Soft lantern light spilled across the lawns of my grandmother's estate, illuminating crystal glasses, pressed linen, and the kind of wealth that pretends it has nothing to prove. Music floated under polite conversation. Laughter carried easily in the warm evening air. Lucas thrived in spaces like this. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing as he spoke, telling stories that made people lean in and nod. He wore confidence like a tailored suit. To anyone watching, he was the picture of a devoted husband and an expectant father. Only I knew how carefully constructed the illusion was. When the time came for speeches, Lucas squeezed my hand and whispered, "You ready?" I nodded. He kissed my cheek for the audience. The microphone felt heavier than it should have when I took it from the stand. For a moment, the crowd quieted, expecting gratitude, charm, something light. I gave them none of that. "My name is Evelyn Hart," I began, my voice steady. "And tonight, I want to talk about truth." Lucas's smile faltered, just slightly. "This estate has belonged to my family for over a century. I continued. It was built by women who survived betrayals that were never spoken about publicly. Women who were told silence was dignity. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. I was taught that wealth protects you, I said. That it insulates you from harm. I learned the hard way that it doesn't. It just makes you a target. Lucas's jaw tightened. I gestured gently, and behind me, a screen lit up. Documents appeared. Emails, dates, names. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This, I said calmly, is the paper trail my husband believed no one would ever see. Lucas stepped forward. Evelyn, he said softly, trying to reach me. This isn't the place. It's exactly the place, I replied, not looking at him. The screen changed. Bank transfers. Gambling debts. IVF consent forms bearing my forged signature. Someone dropped a glass. I was married to a man who planned my pregnancy without my consent. I continued. Who isolated me from my family, manipulated my finances, and prepared legal documents anticipating my death. The words landed like blows. Lucas's face drained of color. Police officers moved quietly along the perimeter. Guests noticed now. Phones came out. This isn't true, Lucas said, louder now. She's confused. She's under stress. The screen changed again. The drafted death certificate. Silence fell hard. You see, I said, turning to face him at last. Men like Lucas depend on disbelief. On politeness. On the hope that no one will make a scene. I stepped closer. Tonight, I whispered into the microphone. I chose the scene. The officers approached. Lucas backed away, shaking his head. This is a misunderstanding, he said. I can explain. Please do, one of the officers said, holding out handcuffs. The crowd parted as Lucas was escorted away. Some guests looked horrified. Others looked vindicated, like something they'd never been able to name had finally taken shape. I handed the microphone back to the stand. My hands were calm. Later, as the estate emptied and silence reclaimed the garden, my mother found me sitting on the steps, wrapped in a shawl. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside me and held my hand. In the distance, sirens faded. Lucas's lies had collapsed under their own weight, exactly as they always do when exposed to light. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear. The night was designed to celebrate legacy. White lights draped through the old trees, music hummed low and elegant, and the gardens of my grandmother's estate glowed the way they always had. Timeless, protected, unquestioned. Guests moved in practiced circles, champagne flutes catching the light, conversations layered with influence and reputation. Lucas belonged here. He always did. He thrived under chandeliers and polite admiration, wearing charm like armor. That evening, he played the role perfectly. Attentive husband, hand resting possessively on my back, smiling every time someone congratulated us on the baby. What they didn't know was that this night wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. When the host announced a short speech, Lucas leaned toward me and whispered, "Say something warm. They love you." I nodded. The microphone hummed softly as I took it, the sound carrying farther than I expected. The crowd quieted with polite anticipation. "My name is Evelyn Hart," I said. "And tonight, I want to talk about truth." Lucas's fingers tightened on his glass. "This house has been in my family for generations," I continued. "It has seen weddings, funerals, fortunes made and lost. What it has also seen, though rarely acknowledged, are betrayals carefully hidden behind manners and money." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. "I believed I was safe," I said. "I believed marriage protected me. I believed love made people honest." Lucas took a step forward. "Evelyn," he murmured, "you're not feeling well. Let's..." Behind me, the screen lit up. The first slide appeared: emails, legal correspondence, dates highlighted, names underlined. A low murmur spread across the lawn. "These documents," I said evenly, "belong to my husband. They outline a financial strategy built on deception, debt," and Lucas laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "This is insane," he said. "She's pregnant. She's emotional." The next slide appeared. IVF consent forms. My forged signature. Gasps cut through the night air. "I was never told my husband was infertile," I continued. "I was never asked to approve genetic substitution. My pregnancy, my body, was used as leverage in a financial plan I never consented to." Phones rose in hands. Someone whispered my name. Lucas's face drained, his confidence leaking away in real time. This isn't the full context, he said louder now. She's twisting things. The screen changed again. Bank transfers. Gambling debts. Offshore accounts. Patterns impossible to deny. You see, I said, my voice calm enough to scare even me. Lies survive in private. They die in public. The final slide appeared. A drafted death certificate. My name printed neatly at the top. 'Cause of death complications during childbirth. The garden went silent. Not awkward silence, grave silence. Lucas stumbled back a step. This is fake, he said weakly. That's when the police moved in, not rushing. Not dramatic. Just inevitable. Lucas Reed. An officer said, we need you to come with us. This is a mistake, Lucas said, panic finally breaking through. Evelyn. Tell them. I met his eyes for the first time that night. You planned my end, I said quietly. So I planned your exposure. Handcuffs clicked closed. The sound echoed louder than the music ever had. As he was led away, the crowd parted instinctively, like people making room for something contagious. Some looked horrified. Others looked relieved, as if a suspicion they'd never dared voice had finally been proven true. The party ended without announcement. Guests left in silence. When the last car disappeared down the long gravel drive, my mother found me sitting on the stone steps, my hands resting on my stomach. You were brave, she said softly. No, I replied. I was done being quiet. The estate settled into stillness, the kind that follows a storm. Lucas's lies hadn't just collapsed, they had been witnessed. And that made all the difference. They say the hardest part of revenge is living with what comes after. I found the opposite to be true. The hardest part was surviving long enough to reach the moment when everything went quiet. After Lucas was arrested, the world didn't explode the way movies promise. There were no flashing headlines the next morning, no instant closure, no dramatic confession that tied everything up neatly. Justice, I learned, moves slowly, methodically, like it wants to make sure you're not rushing toward the wrong ending. Court dates replaced dinner plans. Depositions replaced small talk. My name appeared in legal documents instead of invitations. But for the first time in years, I was in control of my own life. I moved out of the house we shared within a week. Not in a dramatic rush. No boxes thrown, no tears spilled over furniture that had only ever been stage dressing. I left behind what didn't matter and took with me what did. Safety, autonomy, truth. My pregnancy became peaceful again. Without Lucas's constant presence, my body seemed to exhale. The anxiety that had lived under my skin for months loosened its grip. Doctors monitored me closely, aware of everything that had happened, and reassured me with facts instead of half-truths. The baby was healthy. That was all I needed to know. My mother moved into the estate with me during the final months. We didn't talk much at first. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some apologies don't need words. They live in shared meals, in quiet walks, in the way she rested a hand on my back when I climbed the stairs. Lucas's trial came faster than I expected. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial fraud, reproductive coercion, identity falsification, conspiracy. The sealed settlements from his past were reopened. Other women came forward. I wasn't alone anymore. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. I gave birth on a cold, bright morning in early spring. No audience. No drama. Just my mother holding one hand and a nurse counting breaths. When they placed my child on my chest, something inside me finally settled. This life, this tiny, perfect life, had survived despite everything. I named my child Grace. Not because of forgiveness, but because grace is what remains when power is taken away from those who abuse it. In the months that followed, I rebuilt quietly. I returned to work on my own terms. I restructured the trust to fund women's legal defense initiatives. Something Lucas would have despised. I sold parts of the estate I no longer needed and preserved the rest as a place of refuge, not display. People asked if I was afraid Lucas would come after me when he was released. I wasn't. Men like him don't haunt the women who expose them. They haunt their own failures. Sometimes late at night, I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who chose a man over her instincts, who mistook charm for safety, who believed love required sacrifice without question. I didn't hate her. She survived long enough for me to become this version. The version who understands that revenge isn't destruction, it's reclamation. I didn't ruin Lucas's life. I took back mine. And that was enough.